same for public and private institutions. It takes a different form, but private institutions may have a large endowment but are more heavily tuition-driven. Public institutions are budget-driven. But the same thing happens. As the economy softens, then there are increasing concerns for the internal management of higher educational institutions. Many of the practices that we follow now are new. One of the things as an analyst, I could always tell when I went into a public versus a private institution. The public institution, no one knew how much things cost. The private institution, everybody knew how much things cost. It works that way for us. Educational institutions. I spent a lot of time as an analyst for a hospital. If you go into a hospital, you don't have to know whether it's a community hospital or a proprietary hospital. If people know how much things cost, it's going to be proprietary. And that has fallen 100% across the line. Many of the cost accounting procedures that are done in institutions now are very good, long overdue. There are, of course, concerns for some kinds of institutions whose business practices include unique ways to acquire Title IV funds, a lot of front-loading in terms of gathering students who are not prepared into an institution, just in order to get their federal money. And that's something that, as a consumer, you need to watch for. You look for stuff like that, and you see it in the paper all the time, where people have gotten fined, they've gotten reprimanded by the Department of Education, because their push was to get people into college, not to get them out successfully. And an interesting article in the Chronicle of Higher Education, it said the last bastion of institutional inefficiency in full-time faculty. Across the board, and I've forgotten the name of the thing, about 3 months ago, across the board, the full-time faculty is a really expensive proposition. And you see people being challenged everywhere about what to do about the full-time faculty. Full-time faculty members like a weapon. If you've got them, you heard the expression, if the only tool you've got is a hammer, every problem you look at is going to look like a nail. If you've got a faculty member who teaches some particular subject, you have to use it for something. And even though you don't have a great demand for that, it's something that Webster struggles with as much as anybody. We have two different kinds of faculty. We have full-time, tenured faculty. The bulk of our faculty at the extended campus are adjunct, which drives some of the people in St. Louis nuts, but they're just as qualified. And they're doing what they're talking about. And for anybody that has to do with institutional governance, every one of our adjunct faculty members is on a 9-week contract, which means that we never have to worry about firing anybody. We just don't renew their contract, which is an interesting kind of dimension. The credentialability factor that I've mentioned there is a kind of an interesting dimension of higher education. There seems to be a great drive for credentialability. That's for the institutions, for the students, for the professions. Everybody wants to get a credential. The position we like to take is that education on its own is valuable. It's a performance good. If you use it properly, well-educated people are going to be better at what they do in general. All generalities do with this kind of falls. An education with a credential attached to it, like a degree or a certificate, is better because people can count it. The worst kind of situation is a credential without the education. And that's something that as a consumer you need to watch for. There are people that do that kind of stuff. When I was in law school, I thought, I felt like I was born in law school. I knew I was going to die in law school. And I was riding on an airplane someplace, and I read something about an institution in Indiana. And it said, earn your bachelor's, master's, PhD, MD, or JD by correspondence. I thought, wow, let me find out about that. So I sent off some information, and they sent back very glossy, spectacular brochures. And I thought, I wonder if they're accredited. So, because I was a fellow on accreditation years ago. So I'm sensitive to accreditation. And the little guy, he said, oh yeah, we're accredited. I said, who accredits you? And then they sent me another glossy folder. about this accrediting agency that I didn't know anything about. Schools in Florida generally SACs, because our headquarters in St. Louis was more central. So regional accreditation, I thought it was going to be one of those. It wasn't. We tried an accrediting agency that I'd never heard of before. And then I looked, when I thought, God, it's really, they've got a building and everything must be. And then I happened to look at the address of the accrediting agency. It's the same address as the university. They're accrediting themselves. They did have one little qualification in their stuff. And actually, getting a JD was very intriguing. There was a short thesis that had to write. It was about 6 inches by 30 inches. And all you do is you name a lot of numbers and you got your degree. They did put the qualification that although you got the JD, there was no guarantee that you were going to be able to practice law. But it was very intriguing, and it would something people were doing, people were following. There was a Berry University in Orlando. You may have heard about opened their law school and began admitting people, and then ran into trouble with accreditation. And so they actually graduated. People finished law school and discovered they couldn't sit for the bar exam, and because they were not accredited, and that caused a lot of problems for people. And a lot of very well educated paralegals. Basically, they were fully qualified, except for they couldn't take the bar exam. Faculty credentialing, we mentioned that business about taking a look. Selecting faculty is always difficult because you take a look at their credentials, it's very hard to say, okay, this is going to be a good teacher, this one is not. We did some psychological profiling and discovered that the primary characteristic of someone who's going to be a good faculty member is ecocentricity. They got to want to get up front of the room and who should we communicate with? And it's something that we follow all the time. Some of the other hot topics we got: internationalism, a challenge for all institutions in Florida, and that has to do with the concern for global education. This has an impact on, in terms of the kind of programs we offer, where we offer them. It has an impact on the student body. It also has an impact on jurisdiction. When you have people who are generating educational materials from other countries, in terms of who's responsible for maintaining jurisdiction over these things, that can be a real problem. We have admiralty law, that's been around for a while, but other than that, law has not kept up with international intellectual property concerns. The reason I couldn't remember what it was, WOMA. We have an organization in Orlando called Webster Orlando Multicultural Association, run by the students. We have the largest international student body outside of St. Louis, and they run their own organization, and it operates very much as a host for people from other countries. We had a problem internally, which we took care of. We had one of the faculty members who taught in the international business program was trying very hard to support a student who was in some trouble in terms of staying in the program. And I was so impressed with this faculty member. He was going out of his way to write letters. He wrote St. Louis, trying to get the student into and maintain a presence in our program. And I said, I got to tell you, I'm really impressed with how much work you did here. It's not even your student, just an international student, and I'm really impressed. And he said, well, anything I can do, let me know. I have her power of attorney. I said, how the hell did you get her power of attorney? She wasn't a student, she was a client. They saw the international students as an opportunity because these people were very inexperienced in terms of what the laws were. And they were really proselytizing these students, so he didn't teach for us. This faculty member was a good instructor, but got really to work by degree. Take care of that. You got a comment there about re-entry. Increasingly, we're finding people who are coming back into the education environment who already are well established in a particular environment. For example, people who already have a master's degree coming back for another one because of the fact that they can't get a job in a particular area that we're in. This does two different things. It changes the demographics and it changes the age of the student. We used to have pretty delicate curves in the class. Now our classes are kind of fine moving. We're getting a younger group. We're also getting an older group in, people that are re-entry. Another re-entry group are veterans coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq who are coming back in to get into the workplace. And they have their own particular kinds of problems, including post-traumatic stress disease and a number of other things. In terms of the changing demographics and how that impacts on it, I mentioned going back to law school. When I was old, my wife got so tired of me working all day and going to school at night that she took a separate vacation for 18 months. And the fact that I didn't know she was gone for a month, 3 weeks probably had something to do with why she left. One of my favorites is legalities. The courts have held that there are 3 different kinds of rights when it comes to education institutions. Students have the right to learn. Faculty have the right to teach. Institutions have the right to decide who teaches what to whom. And increasingly, faculty are being seen as employees rather than running into the problems of academic freedom. I like to we give a class on it's the law to our faculty, and I always ask the faculty, what are your basic academic freedom rights under the Constitution of the United States as a faculty member of Webster University? And I love to have them talk about all of these rights. Some of them you can cite the First Amendment, and they're all wrong, because the First Amendment in the Constitution doesn't apply to private institutions, to public institutions. So you have no academic rights. We do subscribe to AEP, Code of Ethics, so the rights attendant to that, but it's a very different kind of environment. We find the problem, in addition to being the regional director for Webster University and the director for Greater Orlando, I'm also the registered agent for Webster in Florida. Webster is identified as a foreign corporation for the state of Florida. Some people suggest it's a foreign corporation, Missouri too. But it's a foreign corporation. You have to register with the state of Florida and identify a registered agent. This is the person that gets all the legal things. If there is any kind of legal action against Florida, against Webster University, it comes to my office. And so I see a lot of these things. I do some trial work, although I don't have to do litigation anymore. I started in the military litigation, but I need anymore. I need an instant replay like a football game, because you have to, the lawyers, you got to do it when the moment is right. You can't wait until later on to think about it. Stop doing that kind of stuff. When somebody, an opponent said something or did something, and I thought, what is the rule? And I go, oh, okay, I got it now. Instead of objection. And the judge said, Mr. Janke, you got to do it when it happens. You can't wait. You know, the next play is already started. You can't go back and do it. And I said, I like the record to reflect an exception to the rule. He said, you want the transcript to reflect the fact that you're old and slow, Mr. Janke? I said, well, no, sir. Just press on. Go ahead. Do that. So we find the two big areas as far as the law is concerned is contracts and discrimination. The idea that students would sue for a grade is impossible to imagine. It happens all the time, claiming discrimination. We have faculty who claim discrimination. Lots of people have their rights and are very vocal about exercising these rights. I'm a member of the Seminole County Bar Association, and one of our speakers a couple of months ago was Janie Mason, who was Casey Anthony's lawyer, and it was a fascinating discussion to listen to him talk. But one of the things that he talked about was the amount of hate mail that he got and the amount of deliberate action that has been taken. People who think they've got the right to to interfere, not just voice an opinion, but the right to interfere. Was it Colorado? Some woman ran down another woman because she looked like Casey Anthony, wasn't even her. Ran her down. He said, Cheney said they got almost 10,000 letters to death threats against his grandkids. So these people that are making all of these things and making all kinds of graphic interference with their lives, these people are the people that sit in our classes. Many of the rights that are being defended are very important, and it's important to make those kinds of things. But on the other hand, some of it has a lot to do with the business about cheating. I had a student come up not too long ago, and I said, why didn't you hand in your assignment? And she said, well, it was very hard. And I said, well, yeah, but what? Why did you hand it in? That was her excuse. And this is the capstone course. She's gone through the whole graduate program. I think that's okay. And another student came up, got his laptop. This is week 8. And Aaron knows some of these people too. This is week 8. He's got an assignment due week 5. And he said, here. And he gave me his computer. I said, what? He said, my assignment's in there. I can't get it out. I didn't say the first thing that came to mind because it would have been an impossible task for the young man. No, you can't. No, I'm not going to accept that. And somebody came up once and complained. They said, I'm going to call the dean because your exam was biased. I said, what do you mean it was biased? They said, it was designed to discriminate against people who didn't work well under pressure and didn't know the material. I said, the dean's telephone number is here. You can call him and tell him because that's exactly what it's supposed to be. But it was, and a lot of times we'll hear things like, well, I always get an A. You know, in this course, you didn't earn it. Yeah, but I always got an A. As if that's the right way to do it. Accessibility, 2 different kinds of accessibility, cost and time distance. We're very good, and most universities are very responsive in terms of offering classes when their students need it. Budget constraints have an impact. It is almost always possible for a student to find financial aid. There are many people who confuse the difference between a grant and a loan, but financial aid is almost always available. And we have a lot of students that do that kind of stuff. But the trap is, I don't know how many people watch Judge Judy. I don't all the time, but I saw something on my computer. I was looking at something else. You know, it was an outtake from a Judge Judy show, and somebody was being sued for not paying his rent, and his defense was he didn't have any money. And Judge Judy pointed out he was getting $22,000 a year in tuition assistance and $500 a month for the state because he didn't have a job. He said, yeah, that's not for me. And she said, well, what do you think it's for? He said, that's for me. Because I'm me. I'm America. No, wrong. You have to do that kind of stuff. Security. The reception last night, a lot of talking about security. Security is an increasing concern for a person. Everybody in Florida who comes on your property is an invitee, which means you have a duty to protect them against hazards, warn them, protect them against hazards, and seek hazards. The security issues that are involved in that include things like physical security. We all remember Virginia Tech, all of those kind of things. Doing that all the time. Information security, people hack into the computers all the time, and there's a lot of data that students run. And intellectual security, the kind of stuff that the faculty prepare. We had some problem with that. Basically, the faculty member, if they produce something and it's not worth for hire, in other words, they don't have a specific contract, it's their stuff. So if the faculty member produces something for a course, it's their stuff. The nuclear engineering program was it's kind of an interesting dimension on security. If you think that the security in like a bank or an institution is very high, you want to go to a nuclear reactor. Most reactors don't have lots of fences and things. They have a little sign that said such and such a statute authorizes the use of deadly force. That means gun for people. And one of our clients was Wisconsin Public Service Corporation, which had a reactor right on the shore of Lake Michigan. You ever been to Lake Michigan? It gets cold. It gets cold in the summertime, but it gets cold in the wintertime. So the reactor, because it heats water, tends to melt the ice right outside the reactor, which draws all kinds of wildlife. Fish get bigger, they swim and all this, it's all wonderful. And then people, the fishermen get out there. One of the things you have to have if you go fishing in Wisconsin is a lot of beer. And I mean, it's in the bar. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I don't know about that. But and then one of the things about drinking a lot of beer is that you have to use the restroom. And Wisconsin Public Service Corporation has a tremendous problem. Because people want to use the reactor side, and they said, no, you can't. And people will try to climb the wire to get into the thing. You just don't want to do that. When I mean guns, I don't mean handguns, I mean machine guns. One of our faculty members, happened to be in Wisconsin, went there for his routinely scheduled class. And there was a schedule mix-up. We didn't know he was coming. So we got to the reactor site, got to the security checkpoint. The guard said, I'm sorry, sir, you're not on the access list. We can't let you in. And he said, you don't seem to understand. I'm a full professor of engineering from the University of Maryland, proceeded to try to force his way into the reactor site. Well, they arrested him. And by the time the people told me about it, they had him on an armed guard. A couple of guys in M16s holding him in the lunchroom. And he finally distracted him and got him back out of there. He said, it never happens that way in College Park. And that's right. He would have been all right if he hadn't tried to say, well, and the other bit is about partnerships. Partnerships, we see a lot of increasing partnerships between different institutions. We see a lot of partnerships between education institutions and organizations. We see things like preferred provider organizations, tuition advisors. A lot of companies outsource their education acquisition in order to identify different ways of saving money. Many of these partnerships are very good. There's a trap, and that if you're not careful that some of these partnerships or affiliations, and I'm using the partnership as a small piece, not the legal partnership. But many of these run afoul of the restraints of trade. Brown University was one of several institutions that got together and said, hey, well intended, let's see if we can't stabilize our scholarship money. And another institution challenged them and won. And if you take a look at the United States v. Brown, they were held liable for restraint of trade. That's because they were setting artificially set prices of scholarship. We have other kinds of things that happen, but the idea behind that, also in terms of partnerships, in addition to partnerships between institutions, even on something called the Center for Higher Education line. But in addition to that, and the institutions and organizations partnerships, we see partnerships between different methods of teaching. I mentioned the hybrid course. Online teaching has expanded a lot, but there are problems with online teaching. So frequently we see hybrid courses where you have a combination of online distance education and a faculty. People seem to need faculty. So that very quickly are some of the hot buttons as far as education is concerned. There are many people that many things about each of those as we expand. And I welcome your comments. Action ideas for you. First of all, continue to learn. We're preaching to the choir. You're here because you want to know about what's going on in education. It's not like a vaccination. I'm telling you, continue to learn. The theme, education plus energy equals growth, is a very important consideration. Education is not a vaccination. You have to use it in order to do it. In terms of those two different things, with this continuing to learn, Gandhi is quoted as saying, you should live as if you were to die tomorrow. You should learn as if you were to live forever. And I thought, yes, basically, yeah. But Thomas Huxley said, the goal of all life is not knowledge, but action. Using the education that you have, using the education people have, continue to advance it. If there's a half-life to education, and entropy dictates if you leave your intellectual inventory alone long enough, it won't decay off. You have to re-energize and with new education. And as far as dealing with the whole process, again, you're here because you're curious, you're interested, you want to be involved, you want to be commended for doing this. I would leave you with the words of C. Dan Baker in terms of the way we operate our individual lives with respect to education, energy, and growth. And he said, I'm only one person, but I am one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. What I can do, I ought to do.